The right to offend is not some pesky little part of freedom of speech that we have to put up with. It is the heart and soul and lungs of freedom of speech. It is the coursing lifeblood of human progress. It is the instigator of liberty and modernity and science and understanding. What a laughing stock today's student leaders are, that they can so casually dismiss the right to be offensive without realizing that their lovely, enlightened lives are the gift of individuals who gave offense. Offensiveness is not just something we have to begrudgingly accept. Offensiveness is the motor of human progress.
Now broadcasting from the Right to Offend Media Studios in sunny South Florida, bringing you the latest in politics, current events, art, and pop culture. This is the Whitfield Report Live with Sam Whitfield.
But giving offense is good. In fact, it's essential.
Well, folks, we are back for the Monday edition of the Whitfield Report, and we're recording a little, later than usual, so you might be hearing this on a Tuesday rather, or whenever you listen to this podcast. But regardless, welcome to the Monday show, and we're doing something a little different. We usually don't talk politics on Mondays. We usually save that for the Wednesday show, and I'm sure there will be a lot to cover on Wednesday as well, considering the topic that we're discussing is ongoing. But for today's show, I'm joined by Gabe Iacaboni of American Watchmen and of the Regular Blokes podcast, which we've kind of started, but we also kind of haven't. It's a little weird, but
we'll get there.
It is what it is, I guess. Anyway, Gabe, welcome to the show, and boy, big news day and big news weekend, huh?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. So there was a summit between Trump and Putin and Zelensky in Alaska, and what's interesting to me, kind of starting off, is CNN barely covered it, and even Fox News, which you would think is like more pro-Trump, from what I saw, at least online, they didn't seem to cover it very much at all. Now, I don't have cable TV, so I don't actually know what the televised coverage was like, but it kind of seemed a little surprisingly lacking as far as US media coverage goes. So, based on what I saw, was mainly piecing together stuff from from X, and then honestly what some of you guys were saying in the group chat. So, kind of what are your kind of starting thoughts on this whole thing?
I mean, I don't have cable TV either. So, I mean, I think that the thing with Fox News and the other media outlets is that a lot of them are still full of the establishment kind of neocon types. So I'm not super surprised that they don't like Trump that much, and they don't honestly know how to cover it. But the other thing is, too, that a lot of details from the summit haven't really come out yet.
Right.
I mean, Trump basically said, yeah, we have the framework of a deal, but I'm not going to tell you the contours of the deal. We can kind of get the idea that part of Russia's demands were, we want the territory that we've conquered, we want some additional territory, and then we want all the Russian territory that Ukraine has conquered, which honestly is not much. But, the day after the summit, or yesterday, Saturday or Sunday, Zelensky came out and said, well, we're not going to give up any territory to Russia. And realistically, the only way there's going to be a peace deal is if Ukraine gives up territory, because there's no way that Ukraine is going to take back all the territory that it's lost to Russia. So,
right.
What you're running into is the practicality of Trump basically saying what everybody wants to knows is true, but nobody wants to acknowledge, which is Russia's going to get territory out of Ukraine, and Trump knows it, but Ukraine isn't there yet. They have to save face and they have to show it. But I think eventually Ukraine will get there because there was I think it was an MSNBC poll or it was a CNBC poll that found that a majority of Ukrainians now are in favor of some sort of peace deal. And a year ago, it was like 70% of the populace, Ukrainians, wanted to fight the war until they had all their territory back.
Right. Yeah, and there was that comment. I shouldn't say comment. It was more than that, but there was that remark, if you remember, and if the audience remembers, from like back in, I want to say like February or March, basically when Zelensky visited the White House and kind of threw, a temper tantrum. And one of the viral moments, from that thing was, JD Vance basically said, well, you guys are going to have to cede territory. I don't know if those were his exact words, but his basic, message was that, endlessly fighting Russia is not is not a strategy. It's not it's not a long-term plan, and we can't, keep basically paying, for this for
endlessly. Yeah, I mean,
and I think we're really beginning to kind of see that, based on what I've seen, and again, the coverage is pretty limited. But it seems to me like, basically those chickens are coming home to roost, so to speak, and Vance was right.
Yeah, I mean, there's no way that Ukraine is going to reconquer all the territory that it has lost to Russia. There's simply Ukraine doesn't have the manpower, they don't have the firepower. The only way they would be able to do that is if Europe or the US got directly involved and put troops and tanks and air power into the war. That's not going to happen. So Ukraine by itself cannot reconquer all the territory it's lost. Now,
right.
One thing I did find interesting, and there's mixed reporting on this, was that Trump is saying that he was able to get Putin to agree somewhat to a U.S. security guarantee for Ukraine. So if that is true, like if Russia is going to let the US back up Ukraine to the point where like we're giving them a ton of arms, maybe or maybe they don't join NATO, but there's some sort of agreement between the US and Ukraine of like a joint defense pact, which is pretty much the equivalent of like Article 5 for NATO, but Ukraine has to cede territory. That's a win for Ukraine and it's a win for the West because basically it means if Russia attacks Ukraine directly again, we get involved. So Trump sort of hinted at that Putin had agreed to that, which I think would be the biggest thing because Russia has fought that, the security guarantee, the US with Ukraine, and then Ukraine joining NATO. And so if one of those things is allowed, I think that's a bigger deal actually than Ukraine ceding territory because that's the security guarantee that Ukraine has wanted from us since the Biden administration, and even the Biden administration wouldn't give it to Ukraine.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I hadn't heard that that Putin was okay with that, but that would have been really interesting considering that basically, when Tucker Carlson interviewed Putin at the end of last year, there was a lot of Tucker asked some, I thought, pretty, fair questions, and, Putin basically kind of filibustered for
Mm,
for close to an hour on a lot of them. But one of the things that Putin did say that I found, very interesting, and I don't know, if he was being, genuine or what, or if he was just, trying to propagandize or what. But one of the things that he, had said was that back in the 90s, in the early 90s, after the wall fell and the Cold War kind of ended, the way Putin kind of explains things, he says that Russia kind of wanted to come to the table and either join NATO or have it dissolve to kind of
mhm.
officially symbolize that, hey, there's no more hostility between the West and Russia. And I believe according to him, it was Clinton who basically said, well, we'll think about that. But then, at the end of the Clinton administration, it was basically like, well, no can do. And
Mhm.
I guess Bush kind of did but Bush 43 kind of did the same thing.
Mhm.
All that is to say, that's one of the reasons why, he's kind of in I guess, you know, so upset that NATO and
Mhm.
the US is backing Ukraine. So for him to be okay with, Ukraine joining NATO is kind of a surprising move. If true, I guess. And
Yeah.
I
I mean, I think it's an acknowledgement by Putin of the reality of the situation, which is that, and I do give Trump some credit for this, that because of the way things have played out over the last few years, and especially the last year with Trump in office, Europe is almost fully galvanized against Russia to the point that we're almost back in like the Cold War. And I don't know if Putin actually anticipated that that would happen. I mean, I think it's sort of an inevitable consequence of Russia's failure to conquer Ukraine or conquer it significantly. If he'd conquered the capital, had half of Ukraine, it would be a different story. But this bogged down war at this point where the lines barely shift, it's gone on for 3 years. It's turned almost every country in Europe against Russia. And I don't think that's what Putin anticipated. So Putin has said for years, Ukraine is ours. The fall of the Soviet Union is the greatest tragedy in the world. So there was the military aspect of NATO, but there also was the old Soviet bloc countries. They've developed much closer economic ties with Western Europe and the US and just the West in general. And that also was a reason why Putin went into Ukraine. And if he had succeeded in conquering Ukraine or having the war go much better than it obviously has, he would have much more leverage to put pressure on these other former Soviet bloc countries and say, come back to economic ties with Russia. Our economy is strong, yada yada yada. And instead, a lot of those Soviet bloc countries have furthered their ties with Europe economically and now militarily. So he's he's basically playing with a hand where he has like one card left, and his one card left is, well, I can get as much as I can out of Ukraine, but that's about the only card he has left to play.
I think you're right, Gabe, and not just that, but I think you're absolutely right that I don't think Putin, or really honestly, even the West really expected that the war with Ukraine would last as long
Mm-hmm.
as it has. I mean,
Yeah,
it we're
3 years.
basically going close to like 5 years on
Yeah.
now, which, you know, compared to, Iraq and Afghanistan, to us, that seems like, a pretty short period of time, but like a 5-year war is in reality a long period of time. So I think you're right that Putin wasn't expecting that. I also, I think the other thing that has kind of, maybe surprised Putin a bit is, again, going back to the Tucker Carlson interview, he had kind of, a lot of people kind of missed this, but he hinted at one point that, well, you know, if things don't go our way, China can always come in and back us, kind of doing like the whole evil mafioso, thing. I think what's kind of maybe surprised him a bit is that the Chinese, they really, like, as far as I can tell, they're not interested in they're not interested in, in joining in the Ukraine, conflict, because, um, they really, there's nothing for them to gain from it, really. Um, so China's like, well, why would we bother? And I don't think Putin was really maybe expecting that either.
I mean, China and Russia, I mean, despite the fact that they're both pretty much communist countries and they have a history of communism, they don't like each other. They've never really liked each other from the Russian Chinese War of like 19 or sorry, I'm getting that mixed up, but from basically the time when the Soviet Union was formed and China was formed, they have been at odds. And ironically, it hasn't gotten better because at the time that the Soviet Union became the Soviet Union, China was still technically a democracy. It was just fighting like a 30-year civil war. But the Democrats
Right.
were supposedly in power back then. But when China became communist, Russia was a threat because it was the other communist country in the world. And so they have diplomatic relations, but their goals and their objectives are very, very different. Like the way that their economies have developed over time is also just kind of showcasing the difference between China and Russia, which is China has strengthened a lot of its ties with Western countries economically, um, not necessarily militarily or diplomatically, but it's hard to deny that the US and China, we are tied together economically. The same cannot be said for Russia and the West. So, Russia and China, they've taken different courses in terms of how they've governed and how they've kind of proceeded forward into the 21st century in terms of their economies, how they work with other countries. And so, whereas we have an antagonistic relationship with China, primarily because China saber rattles with Taiwan, and China definitely manipulates their market and punishes foreign companies that come in for things like trademark infringement. Uh, they at least allow those countries to come in, those businesses to come in and actually provide economic development, whereas Russia almost doesn't do that. And Russia's behavior with the West has basically ensured that they're going to have a ton of sanctions dropped on them. And Russia has actually obviously gone to war with Ukraine. So they've taken it a step further. So whereas China has found a way to coexist with the West and be successful with the current geopolitical paradigm, Russia has not. And it's kind of a microcosm of how Russia and China have dealt with the world as it's changed, how their governments have changed, and how they've dealt with the post Cold War era.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you're absolutely right in regards to China. like I know that Max and my co-host Max and my other co-host Shmuley will they'll say, and I don't think they're wrong when they say this, but China is a threat to us potentially, in the long term. But I also think the saying is true too. Trade is kind of, I don't want to say the deterrent because that might not be the exact right terminology, but basically, the old economic saying goes is that if you're doing, if you're trading and doing commerce, between two countries, that's kind of the enemy of war, so to speak. That's kind of a preventer of war, and I think that's kind of what has helped, us and China and a lot of other countries. Whereas, Russia, I don't think, they're not isolationist, but I don't think, they're as much into, trading goods with other countries to the extent that, China and, the rest of Europe is. So
yeah, I mean, China has diversified its economy in such a way that it's integrated into many countries as well. So if you punish China, that country's economy is going to suffer unless that country takes steps to minimize it. And that partially has what has happened here in the US, except both us and China realize how economic, but Russia has not done anything like that. Like Russia can basically be described as a dying petrochemical state. And that's what it is. I mean, its economy is primarily mineral based, natural resource based, but it doesn't make a lot of stuff that it ships to other corners of the world. It doesn't have, say, like a Ford or a GM coming in, building plants, making vehicles and selling them in Russia. It doesn't have those types of industries. And so that has really made it hard for Russia economically to actually move forward. Which
right.
which ironically Putin has used as an excuse to go after Ukraine because he's like, the West is interfering in all this stuff, so we need to go take back these countries that or territory that we lost. But that ignores the fact that for years after the Cold War, Russia had an opportunity to do that. Now, I'm not defending how the West handled post Cold War Russia because I think it was handled poorly. I think throwing a bunch of democratic principles and institutions and corporatism into a country that hasn't had them ever is a really bad idea.
Right.
But Russia had the opportunity to actually try and incorporate these things into their economic system and actually expand a trade presence to the West, have foreign industry come into their country and build their industries there. And Russia didn't do it. And when Putin took power, it just retracted further. And Putin nationalized a bunch of actual Russian businesses and made them property of the state. And it's really, really only gotten worse from there. So all that to say, that isn't to defend China because China does a lot of non-free trade stuff, again, like with trademarks and stealing them from foreign companies. But at least those companies are actually in China, and China wants them to come and develop industries and employ people and build things and spend money and create economic growth. Russia has never done that, and especially has never done that under Putin. So Putin has kind of used it to say, well, if we recreate the old Soviet bloc, our economic sphere of influence, that will change. And again, if things had gone better in Ukraine, that might have actually come to pass. Maybe it could have scared some countries into being like, okay, that we should reinforce ties with Russia. But instead, most of these former Soviet bloc countries are pretty much economically in the West camp. And so, like I said, the writing's kind of on the wall for this, but I fully expect Putin to drag it out as much as he can because he needs to frame it as a win.
Sure. And I mean, I think the other thing, to that point too is, I think the other thing too is we're getting to the point too where like I think Russians themselves, not the government and not Putin, but I think your average ordinary Russian, has expressed that they're fatigued with this war, that they don't
Mm-hmm.
even really want to be, in the war themselves. It has nothing to do with, like sympathy for Ukraine
Mm-hmm.
or anything like that. I mean, it might, to some extent, but I think it's more of like hey, conditions are shitty for us too,
Mm-hmm.
and we're being the ones sent to die. As much as, Putin might try and, snuff some of that out, uh, in the age of the internet, it's impossible for, them to jail. It's kind of the old say, you can't
Mm-hmm.
jail everybody.
Right. Yeah.
So, and
Yeah.
I
And
think that's kind of gotten out, too,
yeah.
more so than people might think.
Yeah, I mean, Russia politically, like Putin has been able to maintain control of Russia because the government provides things to rural residents who then in turn internalize the government takes care of me, and it may be it may be a shitty situation, but at least it's better than the alternative where I don't know who's going to take care of me, I don't know what's going to happen. And that that has kind of been internalized into Russian politics and Russian history since Russia has been a country. I mean, think of it this way, like Russia since it was like different provinces when the different Russian princes controlled it. The trade-off was from the average Russian serf, peasant, even noble was I trade some of my freedom and you take care of me. And that has always been kind of how Russia has operated even during the time when they had the czars. Like there was a trade-off between sacrifice some of my freedoms, you take care of me.
Right.
And unlike Europe had kind of the democratic enlightening. Russia didn't go through that because Russia's entire history was basically like we're a giant landmass there where multiple countries can invade us. So why are we going to trust something or somebody that we don't know? And so you can look at their history from they were invaded by the Huns to they have been at war with China multiple times. They've gone to war with Japan. They've been at war with Korea. That it has been internalized in the average Russian to trade some of their personal freedoms for security. And so that has translated all the way to Putin, and he knows this. He knows Russian history well. And so many of the government's strongest supporters, they rely on the government to take care of them. And that has allowed Putin and his supporters and his minions to stay in power. And there's a trade off to that. If the government is giving lots of subsidies and lots of money to people, the government has to have money to do it. Like, you can go into debt, but you can only do that to such a degree. And that's where I think things like the economic sanctions have taken a toll on Russia. That's where I think the fact that oil prices have been low relatively for years I think that's taken a toll on Russia. So the Russian economy and the average Russian is paying a price for this war. I don't think it's going to mean that Putin's government is going to fall, but that's just another variable in terms of bringing Putin to the negotiating table and kind of getting to the end stages of this war.
Right.
Russia can't sustain this indefinitely. They know it. The West knows it. Even Ukraine knows it. But I mean, Russia still outclasses and outmasses the Ukrainians. The thing is just at this point that the lines in Ukraine are so entrenched that it's literally like trying to cross a World War I battlefield. I mean, like, nobody is going to make massive gains of territory anymore. And so that just makes it even worse because now it's just a slog. And it's just dead Ukrainians, dead Russians, and Russia economically is paying the price. I mean, as are the Ukrainians. I don't want to sell them short either. So I think right now, Zelensky is saving face by being like, we're not going to cede any territory. But I wouldn't be surprised if it comes down to Ukraine ceding territory to them getting some sort of security guarantee from the West. I bet you he would.
Yeah, and I also think, kind of to your point about, Russia suffering economically too. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised, I don't want to say that this will happen for sure, so don't quote me on this, folks, but I honestly wouldn't be surprised given this that, maybe trade with the West is discussed as at least an option, if not, a definite certainty, I would say. Because you're right. I mean, this war has been extremely costly for both sides. And I think at this point, basically Russia and Ukraine both are kind of like trying to see who's going to give up first, basically. Who's going to blink first in this, staring contest.
Yeah. And the other thing is too, like, the longer the war drags out, ironically, probably the stronger Ukraine gets militarily because Europe is providing them materials and training. And contrary to like Trump's bluster on Ukraine and how much he dislikes what Biden has done by giving them weapons, Trump is still giving them billions of dollars in military equipment, weapons, aid. So it's not like Trump is unilaterally being like, we're just walking away from this. The US isn't involved. Russia, go to town. Now, that's what the left likes to tell you and what they probably honestly believe, but that's not the case. Like, Trump, I think he gave him like another 70 or 80 billion dollars in military weapons and aid. So it's not like Ukraine is going to ever lack for support from the West. They will always say, we need more, we're running out, we need more support, but they're getting substantial support from the West. So Ukraine has more of a manpower issue than they do an equipment issue. And that's not going to change.
Well, again, I mean, the left has, I think they've purposely kind of omitted, Trump and Vance's point of, I will say I think the biggest change between Biden and Trump is Trump is still supporting Ukraine, obviously, but Trump, to the best that he can, I think is trying to hold like Zelensky's feet to the fire a little more of, hey, you really do need to go to the table and at least like hear, what the options are for a ceasefire.
Yeah. It's interesting to see what the left behaves like. I mean, on social media, and social media is not the real world, I fully admit, but it's been interesting to see some of the memes that have and some of the videos that have gone out on Twitter where there's a random photo of when Obama met with Putin at some summit somewhere, and Putin and Obama are in the frame, and Putin's staring at Obama, and Obama is just looking up like, I can't be bothered to deal with this guy. And the every post I've seen on it is like, this is how you deal with dictators, or this is how you deal with tyrants. And it's like, yeah, but that's also how you don't solve issues either.
Yeah, but then like and I have seen those memes, but then as I pointed out, like, to some of these, lefty posters on Twitter, they all conveniently forget too. And I am not the biggest Mitt Romney fan by any
He said they were a threat.
But but Mitt Romney was the one who said, hey, Russia,
Not nice.
They're not nice. And, hey, they might be a problem, down the line.
Yep.
And Obama's little line at the time, that the kind of the left parodied was, the 1980s called and they want their foreign policy.
Right. Yes.
Back.
And do you remember that? I think it was the second debate of that election, where I think it was Candy Crowley who was doing the interview for that. She challenged Mitt Romney on that. Like, she became a surrogate for Barack Obama back then. She's like, "Are you serious? Like, sure Russia's a threat? Like, are you sure?" Like, and she, to be fair, she got a ton of crap for it. But that was the mindset of the left barely a decade ago, which was like, we need to work with Russia. We're in the post-World War or post-Cold War mindset, like neoliberalism, democracy is going to save us all. And now 12 years later, or heck, even 10 years later, or 8 years, whatever, with Biden, it suddenly became, Russia is now this existential threat to democracy. We have to do everything to defeat them. And it kind of became, Russia is kind of, to the left, a perfect thing to virtue signal on. Because it's like this thing that the mob mentality can focus on and go, they're a threat. But then when you actually try to have a substantial, nuanced conversation on it, it's just straight up, they're a danger to democracy. We can't work with dictators. How dare you talk to this person? Like, you can't do that. It's like, how do wars end then?
Right. And if you even ask them, like, okay, why is this war happening at all? Now, granted, there are a lot of conservatives who can't answer that question either. But if you ask like your average, liberal, Twitter user who is just, doing the talking points, they'll just say stuff like, well, Putin is bad. And it's like, well, yeah, but like Putin's been in power, since like, 1998.
Yeah, the 90s.
Yeah, like, why now? And they won't be able to give an answer because they don't know themselves. And then, when you, and, again, going back to the whole Mitt Romney thing, like, say what you will, but he, it is kind of amusing that you bring up Candy Crowley because Candy Crowley kind of scoffed at that, a decade ago. And then I believe it was in this most recent election when she was kind of like, towing the line on, we need to fight against
I mean,
Russia.
The Democratic and kind of liberal line on Russia, I will say, really shifted after Crimea, which is, that after Russia invaded Crimea, or at least they sent in their paramilitary groups, and then Russia, under the auspices of saving the civilian population, decided to annex it. Now it's ours. Like, that really shifted kind of the conversation among Democrats and liberals. And then, of course, when Hillary Clinton came on the scene, she made Russia and Russiagate like the full focus of her campaign. And so ever since then, it's been this: Russia is now the new threat to the West. Whereas, I mean, 4 years from 2012 to 2016, that was not the case.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's kind of domestic politics here, which is the Democrats have always been seen as weak on national security, and so even they need a boogeyman to go after, because they need to combat those perceptions that, like, they're anti-military, they're just peace-loving hippies. They need some sort of existential threat to go after. And, you know, around that time, terrorism was still an issue, and of course it still is, but it wasn't prevalent like it was, you know, when we went into Afghanistan, when we did the surge in Iraq. Like, there weren't those things in the common voter's mind. And so they needed to shift the page. And Russia was kind of this convenient scapegoat that they're like, oh, they took Crimea. Okay, now we can turn around and be like, this is the enemy that we can go after, to show people that, like, yeah, we have a backbone. We're hawks when we need to be hawks. And then when Trump came on the scene, he kind of rewrote the whole script. Because, I mean, my first impression of Trump was when he went to South Carolina and he basically said that the Iraq War was a mistake and George Bush was an idiot because he went into Iraq. And, like, that sort of completely flipped the political script. And I partially think that's why Trump won in 2016, because he kind of had that. He kind of had that anti-establishment Republican in him, but he also was seen as, like, kind of like a Ronald Reagan on foreign policy, and he flipped the script on kind of how people saw Republicans as, like, George Bush, Dick Cheney cronies. But in truth, Trump's governed like a much more conventional Republican on foreign policy. He always has. The shift is much more on the Democratic side in the last 10 years, and also part of that is that they have incorporated a lot of neocons into their party. And so, you know, when you have, like, the Fred Barnes of the world from the Weekly Standard, who were, like, pro Bush, like pro go to war, when they're now writing articles of, like, well, Trump is a threat to democracy, we need to go with Democrats. It's like, it's hard to kind of ignore those voices in your party.
Yeah.
I mean, the Democrats have been very clear about that. Like, they want veterans to run for Congress. They want former CIA operatives and NSA analysts to run for Congress. It's like, well, if you're going to do that, don't be surprised then when your party shifts and turns away from things like, we actually believe in peace, and we're not going to assume that we just need to go to war and kill you. Like, when you have all these people from the defense industry coming into your party, they're going to shift the political focus and gravity of your party.
My favorite one of my favorite moments, just for the I guess the meme factor, was literally like 2 weeks before the 2016 election. I think, I don't know if you remember this, but I know that Josh certainly will, because he and I were DMing back and forth, and we thought this was kind of like a shit post at first.
Mm-hmm.
But the establishment GOP at the very last minute decided to run that Evan McMullen guy, who was like the CIA,
the CIA libertarian.
Yeah. 2 weeks before the general election was like
Yep, they
was like
spat him
what
out.
was like when he got in, and it's like are you serious? Like if you're gonna pick like out left field candidate, they
Yep.
like like at least run someone like Roseanne Barr or someone who is like really
Yeah.
out there,
Yeah. Well, and
because they would have a better chance.
yeah.
So
And to be fair, like there were many in the Republican Party in 2016 that really loathed Trump, not just his personality and his character, but they loathed his foreign policy because he challenged theirs. Like Mitch Mitch McConnell might have made a bunch of political gambles, and he made a gamble that maybe Trump would win, although I'm sure he was just banking on, like, if Hillary wins in 2 years, the voters are going to, be mad at her and they'll give us majorities in Congress or bigger majorities. So I lose nothing by going with Trump. But
yeah,
he hated Trump's foreign policy. He still does to this day, honestly. But there were many in the Republican camp that were just in line with Democrats and Hillary Clinton's view of Russia. And
yeah,
even though Trump's rhetoric has not, or Trump's actions have not met his rhetoric, the fact that he's expressed the things that he's expressing and the fact that he is actually meeting with Putin is something new for the Republican Party in terms of its foreign policy. I mean, it is a true post Cold War foreign policy, which we have never really seen since 9/11. And you could make the argument that, like, 9/11 wasn't really a post Cold War foreign policy, because honestly all it was is just we were shifting who we were focusing on, who we thought was the bigger threat.
right. I think the other thing too is, we look at the post 9/11 era, and I definitely do think that there are differences, but I think that's the other kind of thing with the summit too is, I think a lot of people are kind of like looking at this whole Ukraine Russia thing.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I did notice, and I don't know, I can't remember the guy's handle on Twitter, so I apologize, but there was one user who made I thought it was pretty profound, tweet that basically, I think one of the things that people are hoping that this summit accomplishes is that the resolution can be quicker, because what we don't want to have happen is that Ukraine and Russia fight with each other for the next 20 years.
Yeah.
Because, like, honestly, I mean, this is kind of this is kind of almost embarrassing for me to think about, but like, I was in second grade or third grade when the war in the Middle East started,
Mm-hmm.
and by the time we pulled out of Afghanistan, I was literally graduating college at
Yep.
age 27.
Yep.
So, like,
Yeah.
that's just my lifetime.
Yep.
Like, that's and I think a lot of people are kind of like, well, we don't want Russia and Ukraine turning into another Middle East
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah. And even as a proxy war, obviously from a lives perspective, a human cost, it's expensive.
Yeah.
But financially, it's expensive too. 20 years of war in Afghanistan, and 12, 13 years of war in Iraq, or 10 years, give or take, was hideously expensive as well. And so fighting that war endlessly would mean that, of course, we would get dragged in some way, and we'd have to stay in. And that's honestly not sustainable.
Right.
And you always have the possibility, as long as there's open conflict, that the conflict escalates in some way. A rogue Russian general, and this sounds more like a computer game than anything else, but it's possible. A rogue Roman general goes into another country and attacks a village, and that country then responds or threatens to respond. Like, there's always the chance that the war can escalate and go further. And Russia is still a nuclear power, so there's always the small chance that Russia does something irrational and actually takes that next step and launches a nuke or delivers a tactical nuclear warhead.
Right.
That's the practical reality of having an endless conflict in Ukraine. But when somebody who happens to be Trump tries to end the conflict, then people are just then the left is just like, oh, well, you're capitulating to tyrants and dictators. It's like, yeah, but the trade-off is that we have an endless war, more people die, and you have the endless potential of the war escalating to a point where even more people die. So, which path do you take?
Yeah. Well, and that's, unfortunately, that's kind of always the cost of,
Yep.
War.
Yep.
Even like look back at World War One, even, the treaty that basically ended World War One gave Germany a really bad deal.
Yeah.
And a lot of historians look back and say, well, that's what caused, World War II and the rise of the Nazi Party.
Yep.
Was that Germany kind of got screwed over in the worst possible way.
Yeah.
Hindsight is always 20/20. But I think that's another thing too, is war is costly, and no one is ever going to get completely what they want in war.
Yeah. And I will, the thing is that the longer a country is under isolation, the easier it is for a leader to manipulate people into believing the narrative that they have created. And so, that makes it easier for Putin to maintain power, even if people aren't happy with him, because he can continually frame the narrative of the West is derailing our economy. The West made us go into Ukraine to regain our sovereignty, to strengthen our economy. As long as that's going on, it makes it easier for him to frame the conflict as kind of an existential threat that has to be dealt with between Russia and the West. And that only makes it harder in the future for Russia to ever come back into the global sphere. I think Russia will never be like the democratic pinnacle that I think people think like that Europe is, or even we are. It's going to be something that is shaped by its history, and that's a trade-off between personal freedoms and military security. That's what China is now. China is still an authoritarian state, but there's a level of economic freedom that the state has provided to become more sustainable. The same with South Korea. South Korea is a democracy, but it is very much a strongman democracy. It very much is not very open markets because they heavily subsidize their industries. They got there by being very, very very non-human rights in the 70s and 80s when their leadership built their economy. And kind of the same thing is happening in places like Thailand and Cambodia and Vietnam. Like, those are countries that are democratic in nature, and they're allowing some economic freedoms, but they're still very much like strongman type governments. But that's probably the best you're going to get. You can't put an American style democracy in these other countries and just expect it to work. Like, we've seen this 100 times. We've seen this in Iraq, and we saw it in Afghanistan, and we saw 20 years of war in Afghanistan and 10 years of war in Iraq, and they're not American style democracies. But at
Right.
least today, Iraq is a functioning republic.
Yeah, I think, and I think the real irony too, that, kind of what you mentioned with, the whole democracy thing in the Middle East is, I remember one of the big criticisms of the left at the time, and in hindsight they might have been right, was, well, democracy will never work in the Middle East like it does here for X, Y, and Z reasons.
Right.
And they might have actually been right on that one. I will concede that, as much as I might loathe to.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it is kind of interesting for those same people who are saying that, oh, well, democracy in the Middle East won't work, but it'll totally work in Russia if we, if we just kick Putin out. And it's like, yeah, it's like, okay, Russia might not like have the exact same religious fanaticism as like the Middle East does, but they lived under communism for so long, and then before that they were run by basically like a brutal monarchy too.
Yeah. I mean, the thing about something, and there's lots of differences between obviously Iraq and Afghanistan geopolitically and internally, but the thing about Iraq is that it has a functioning government. Some would call it democratic. Probably our version of democracy, it wouldn't, because very clearly their religious identities are integrated into the political parties. So there isn't a separation of church and state, obviously. But Iraq very much also defines itself by being a geopolitical rival to Iran. And to Bush's credit, I mean, he played on that. Even Obama played on it after Bush, and that helped stabilize things in that country.
Yeah.
Afghanistan never had any of that. Afghanistan shouldn't even be a country, to be honest. It's like 20 different countries rolled into one because of its geography and its tribal identities. And even now, the Taliban is going to forever be fighting internal divisions with tribal warlords. The Northern Alliance has reformed, so the Northern Territories technically don't recognize the Taliban's authority. Afghanistan is forever going to be a broken state because of its geography and because of its religious and sectarian differences.
Yeah.
And we never really identified that and dealt with it successfulul. But, I mean, we transplanted something into Iraq. And it's not a Western-style democracy, but it's a functioning government. It's a functioning republic. It's just a republic that's a product of their religion, the people that are in it, and obviously that's going to be very different than what we have here in the U.S., because we were founded on very different things. So I agree with you. I think Democrats are right literally to say that, in the strictest sense, that we can't substitute American democracy into Iraq or another country. But that isn't to say that we can infuse a flavor of it into a country along with that country's norms and their cultures and their values. Because what we did in Russia in the 90s was exactly what fits exactly with the Democrats saying you can't drop American democracy into Iraq. We tried to drop American democracy into Russia, and we tried to drop free market capitalism into Russia, into a country with no history of that ever. Like, they had monarchs, they had tyrants, they were very much a military state because it's easy to invade a country with like a border of a couple thousand miles of open land. Like, so we were foolish when we tried to do that, and that, I mean, that has fed into the present day situation of where Putin was easily able to gain power. He was able to subsidize rural residents who rewarded him with their votes year after year after year after year. Putin was able to get the military behind him, and it snowballed from there. Whereas other countries have just not taken that route.
Yeah. I mean, in this kind of, granted, this is just one anecdote, from someone who I know, but one of my classmates from college, his dad was originally from the Soviet Union,
Mhm.
and basically like left kind of, in the 90s once the wall came down, like not
Mhm.
immediately after, but pretty like close to it. And one of the things that his dad said, because I did meet him once,
Mhm.
was that, after the Cold War, like it was weird because all of a sudden, all these, old like Soviet, things were like, getting turned into McDonald's, and then like, they had they had like they had like, Levi, jeans, and they had like, Playboy magazine and Cindy Crawford, and all these, there basically what he was saying is there were all these basically like symbols of like, Americana that were like,
Yep.
popping into Russia,
Mhm.
but that's pretty much all there was. There was all window dressing, but it wasn't like they had, like, no one from the State Department, as far as I can tell, and as far as he could tell, like, really came over to, like, really like, whisper in Gorbachev's ear of,
Mhm.
hey, here's how, here's how we might here's how, you might want to do democracy.
Yeah.
So
Well, there's kind of two schools of thought with that, which is one, and this is kind of the parallel between uh, the early mid '90s, even early 2000s for Russia before Putin got into power, and Iraq was Bush got a lot of heat for when he decided to, and so did Petraeus, the military. They got a lot of heat when they decided to bring in the government a lot of former Saddam loyalists, bureaucrats, military leaders, whereas Gorbachev and Yeltsin, they didn't with their own governments. So, like Putin was out of a job for a while,
yeah,
if hypothetically, if they had brought Putin into government and made him invested in the success of this new type of government, it's possible that Putin would not have, formed his own party or run, because he would have owed his allegiances and his success to the existing government. And that is partially what the Bush administration, when they were in Iraq, that's what they banked on, was like, these guys are going to be out in the middle of nowhere. They're going to be milling around. They're going to have lost their money, their power, their prestige. They're going to be angry. And we need to bring them back into the fold so that they can feel like they're invested in something. And it worked to a degree. I mean, it worked to a degree. They didn't do it for everybody, and so that's why you had like the insurgencies that raged through '06 and '07, and the warlords that popped up. But in my mind, from what I've seen and read, it was mostly successful. Like some of those people are still in government in Iraq today. And I'm not saying they're good people, but they're invested in the government's success at this point. And so there's kind of a lesson to be learned by that, which is you have to work with the devils that you know. You can't just
Right.
you can't be this high-minded person who's like, I'm never gonna work with these people. Like, oh, this warlord in Afghanistan, he butchered a bunch of civilians and I don't want to work with him. Well, okay, then he's probably not gonna trust the government, and at some point he might actually raise arms up against the government. Oh,
Yeah.
that's why we bribed a bunch of warlords, because we were like, we want you to participate in the government. Here's some money to help you, to make you and help you do it. I'm not saying that was the successful way to do it, because it really wasn't. But we did try to bring them into the Afghanistani government, but there were a lot of issues with the Afghan government too that went beyond us and were corruption among the inner circle that ran the country.
Well, you want to talk about like existing governments and whatnot. I remember, one of the big things that Obama ran on was that he was going to, close Guantanamo Bay,
Mm-hmm.
and that
Mm-hmm.
he was going to end the Patriot Act.
Mm-hmm.
And, now, granted, like I certainly think he should have ended the Patriot Act for sure.
Yep, agreed.
That would have been good. However, like I do think it is kind of telling. I mean, Dennis Miller made the joke, and I think it was pretty telling that every president, no matter what their campaign is,
Mm-hmm.
on day one, they make all the campaign promises.
Yep.
But on day one, their national security advisor, hands them this is how fucked up the
world is in reality. Yeah.
Yeah, this is how fucked up the real world is.
Yep. Yeah.
And so, like to Obama's credit, like is Gitmo perfect? No, we can debate that, but like yeah, obviously you don't want to just, like close it, down and just like have, terrorists like
Mm-hmm.
Able to go wherever.
Well, because
I think
it'd be front page news if those terrorists went back to their home countries and committed other acts of terrorism. Like there's a political consequence to it. And then the counter has always been like, well, what are you going to do with these people that were in Guantanamo? You're going to bring them on. You're going to bring them on U.S. soil? No, you ain't. Like, nobody is no congressman or woman is going to be like, oh yeah, bring them to like New Jersey, bring them to Texas. Like, yeah, we want these people here. And so that's
even if it's like some off the books, like black site facility in the U.S.
Right.
They don't even want that. For reasons.
Yeah. So I mean, that's a perfect analogy for perfect parallel for Russia, which is that if you don't talk to Putin, as bad a person as he is, and he is a bad person, I don't like him. I don't think anybody really likes him.
Right.
You're not going to end the conflict. So just because you don't like Trump or you don't like Biden or whoever, the fact that they're trying to end the war or they're trying to have discussions does not need to mean, not equate to, the end of democracy. We're appeasing tyrants. And because the trade-off is endless war, the potential for a greater conflict, and always the potential for nuclear war, because Russia is a nuclear power. And I think even Zelensky will acknowledge that. He also just doesn't want to lose face when there's an ultimate peace deal, ceasefire, because I think even he knows the inevitable outcome of this. Ukraine's going to lose territory. The question is how much, and then for Ukraine, the big question for them is can they get some sort of security guarantee from the West, which is as good as getting admission into NATO.
Yeah. And that kind of brings me to, I guess, kind of the ultimate point with this whole summit. As much as I love Trump, he has made some pretty bold claims, and one of the things that he has said, in basically like all of his in basically both of his campaigns, at least since this whole conflict has started, is, well, I'm going to end the war between Russia and Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I certainly think Trump is egotistical enough, for better or for worse, to think that he can do that.
Yeah, for sure.
I like there's no doubt in my mind that Trump thinks he can do that, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But whether or not he can do that is another question.
Yeah.
And so I guess kind of the ultimate question, and why we're here, is what do you see as kind of the end goal of this summit? Is the summit going to be like basically the beginning of negotiations, or do you think that somehow this summit is going to lead to basically an end of the conflict? Because the media and everyone, even on the right, seem to be like, oh, this is going to be the
Mm-hmm.
this is going to be the sit down that's going to end the war.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't see that happening.
No, I agree with you. I think that the summit on Friday was a good first step. I think ultimately what Trump wants is he wants Zelensky to meet. Whether the US is directly involved in that discussion, I'm not 100% sure if Trump wants that, but I know that Trump wants trilateral discussions, which means the US is either directly or indirectly involved in those discussions with Russia and Ukraine, because Ukraine wants stuff from us. So we have to somewhat be involved in those discussions. But Trump wants Zelensky and Putin to be in the same room together. Now, they're not going to be doing the bulk of the negotiating. That'll obviously be between professional diplomats, but the ultimate goal is to get those two in a room and have them either individually, most likely individually, or even if possible together, say we have the framework of a deal for peace or ceasefire or something like that. I don't think that'll happen. I think either something like a ceasefire will come and Zelensky will announce it with Trump, and then Putin will announce it, or Trump will announce it and Zelensky will announce it. But the idea is to get Ukraine and Russia, Zelensky and Putin in the same room to have discussions.
One of the things that I'm curious about is, I think one criticism of Zelensky, and I'm not Ukrainian. It could be a cultural thing. It seems like at least to me, basically Zelensky kind of has the kind of pouty temperament of like, well, I just don't even want to talk to
Mm-hmm.
to Putin or even be in the same room with him. And
Yeah.
I think even people who are sympathetic to him are starting to say that's a bad look. Like, yeah, Putin's a dictator,
Mm-hmm.
but he seems to at least be more in charge of his emotions, and whatnot. So
Yeah, I mean, I think if Zelensky was in a room with Russia, he has the support of enough of the Ukrainian public for them to trust him that he's trying to get the best deal for Ukraine. He's for years been on the radio, the airwaves, TV, interviews, met with Western leaders, and said, I will fight for Ukraine. I will defend our sovereignty. And public polling backs up that most Ukrainians support him. I think if Putin or Zelensky were to meet with Putin, I think it would be seen. I think the Ukrainian public would trust him, as opposed to being like, "Oh, you're a sellout. You're selling us out." So
Yeah.
I think Zelensky has the street cred for that to actually try and pull that off. But I also do think somewhat that Zelensky won't engage with that unless we are directly involved in the talks. That's just a guess on my part. I don't have any insider information one way or the other, but I think he really wants the US to be involved because we can speak from a position of strength. And Ukraine really can't right now.
Right. Well, I think we also kind of have to be in the room because, like or not, I think kind of the world expects us to be in that room too.
Yeah, I agree.
You know, as much as someone might say, yeah, we don't want to be the world's policeman, and I don't think that that's necessarily our role in this either. But I definitely do think that the world, for better or for worse, is looking us to kind of, I guess, be the neutral third party best case,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
scenario.
Well, yeah, I mean, we are still seen as the world's sole superpower. We have made it clear that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is not something we're going to tolerate. And we've given Ukraine billions and billions of dollars of weapons and equipment and training. So I mean, I agree. We have to be in that room because the world expects us to, and we actually have now a financial interest in the resolution of the conflict. So I just don't think that the resolution to the conflict is going to look as black and white as people have made it out to be, which is Ukraine cedes no territory, Russia backs off, or the war continues on. That's not going to happen. Like if there's a ceasefire, my prediction is Ukraine gives up territory, and in return, Ukraine gets some sort of security guarantee from the West or the US, and Russia signs off on it. Russia's like, okay, Ukraine, you can have your security guarantee, fine, but we get all the territory we conquered in the Donetsk. We get Crimea, and you recognize Crimea as part of Russia. Like those are the trade-offs that are going to be in this ceasefire or peace deal, and it's not going to make anybody happy, but it will end the conflict. But for that to happen, you have to get both parties in the room. And right now, Russia and Ukraine, they've never really been in the same room.
No.
It's kind of like, it's kind of like, if you think about it, like Israel and Hezbollah, or Israel and Iran, when they were Israel's, I don't know how long that war went on. I think it was a couple months. But when Israel attacked Iran, Israel sent negotiators to, I think it was the UAE or Qatar, and then Iran sent negotiators to Qatar, but they never actually talked with each other. They were in separate rooms, and the Qatarians would like run between the rooms with the demands because the Israelis and the Iranians never were in the same room together. And that doesn't really work for a peace deal, and that's why Iran and Israel never made a peace deal when they were negotiating in Qatar.
Right.
Like they made a ceasefire only after we dropped a bunch of ordnance on I'm blanking the name of the mountain, but after we dropped a bunch of ordnance on Iran's nuclear enrichment facility in the mountains.
Yeah, and which was like really recent too.
Yep. Yeah, it was a couple
So
months ago. Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, that kind of upset the apple cart when it came to focusing on Ukraine. And so that's where the majority of obviously Trump and the administration's efforts went. But when that ended, the focus shifted back to Ukraine. And you have to meet with somebody to make a peace deal. So
yeah,
no, like I said before, nobody likes Putin. But if you're gonna have a ceasefire or a peace deal, somebody's got to meet with the dude. I mean, you can't just have this war in perpetuity when neither side is willing to say uncle.
yeah. I mean, and at the very least, I don't think that this summit is necessarily going to solve everything. I do think it's going to be an important first step. And
Yep.
I think a lot of people, and maybe they're justified in this. I don't know. It feels like a lot of people like have a lot riding on this summit as far as like expectations go, and I just don't see this being the major resolution that everyone thinks it's going to be.
Yeah, I think if we walk away from the next week or two, because Trump said he had the framework of a deal with Putin. He didn't really say what that framework was, although he did say like there were things that we still disagreed on. If in the next week or two we start hearing from people that there is the framework of a deal between Ukraine and Russia and it leads to more discussions, then I think we are on the path to some sort of ceasefire and some sort of peace. But, that would never have happened if Trump had never met with Putin on Friday. Like,
Right.
you know, Putin would have probably just held out. So, I agree with you. I think this summit can be the path to peace or some sort of resolution that ends the conflict, or it can be, a big nothing burger. But the the incentives are for both Russia and Ukraine to find some sort of way at this point to end the conflict because neither side is winning and they're just throwing it's a meat grinder.
Right.
And what Putin wanted to accomplish, he has technically accomplished because he's taken territory in Ukraine, but the vast majority of what I think he wanted to accomplish, he has failed at. He's not cowed the West. He's not increased Russia's sphere of influence. If anything, he's galvanized the West against him. And Trump is kind of offering him that off ramp, but he has to take that off ramp in such a way that it's politically feasible.
Yeah, and again, I think the other thing too that like he wasn't like counting on too was, like he himself has said that he wants Ukraine to still be viable, and if I can't remember the exact phrasing, but it's basically like, if he has to bomb all the land, then what good is it going to be for him?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know.
And at this point, Ukraine's a military state. Like
Yeah.
it's not what he portrays it as, which is like the wheat fields of Russia. That's not what Ukraine is anymore. It is at least the eastern side of Ukraine is pretty much a bombed out husk where the only people that are there are soldiers at this point.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, so again, even if they conquer Ukraine or even more territory, what they're going to conquer is square footage. They're not going to get anything out of it economically. And that was the portrayal that Putin made for this war, which was like Ukraine is the breadbasket of Russia. We deserve Ukraine. This will make our country stronger. It will make us more economically resilient. None of that is possible anymore.
No, and it's largely by well, maybe not directly, but it is kind of by his own hand. So
Yep. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, the early days of the war where Russia had these dreams of we're going to conquer Ukraine or cut it in half in 3 to 5 days. There was no way that was going to happen with the way that the Russian military structure operates.
right, yeah, it just wasn't in the cards.
Yeah. 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 So, you know, now it's a stalemate. So, I mean, me personally, I hope and pray that there actually is a resolution to the conflict, because the alternative is no better. Like there's no high-mindedness to this anymore about like we're going to defend democratic principles and Russia's evil and Putin's a tyrant and a dictator. Well, if you believe that, you don't want to do anything about it, then the consequence is thousands of more people are going to die. I mean,
Yeah, and
it's a trade off.
yeah, and I think the other thing that people are are starting to consider too is and I don't want to go down this rabbit hole for too long because I know it is getting late, but I think the other thing too is people are starting to consider that you know Putin might be a Putin may not be a great guy, but he might be better than other people
Hmm.
who could potentially run Russia.
Yeah, yeah, that is
And
true.
we don't necessarily know who those people are, but they might not be any better. They might actually be worse, considering
Yeah,
that like Russia is basically run by the Brodfa at this point.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's it's interesting because then you get into like the geopolitics of we don't want a failing Russian state, exactly because of what you mentioned about the what ifs and possibilities and hypotheticals of you know the what happens to those nuclear weapons, who's in charge of Russia after Putin goes. So it is one of those cases where it's almost like it's better to deal with the devil that you know than the devil that you
right,
don't. And so making a deal with Putin is making a deal with the devil. Let's not kid ourselves about it. But it's better than the alternative of trying to deal with somebody that you don't know.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah, and I
because Putin has the incentive to end the war, and you don't necessarily have that with another leader.
yeah,
So I agree with you. I mean, the geopolitics of it are that we don't want a failing Russia. We don't want a Russia that also is belligerently attacking its neighbors like Putin did with Ukraine either. Putin has had plenty of an opportunity to escalate this war into a neighbor or escalate it further with, God forbid, nuclear weapons. He's chosen not to do that because he is to some degree a rational actor. And you can
yeah,
deal with rational actors. You just have to understand what motivates them and what their incentives are. And it's pretty clear what motivates Putin and what the incentives are. So if you dangle enough of those incentives in front of him, does he take them? And I bet you Trump dangled some of those in front of him. Like, you get territory, you can say to your people, you accomplished your job, you took back some of Ukraine, and now it's time to rebuild and focus on ourselves. Just like I'm sure Trump is going to try and sweet talk Zelensky and say, like, these are the things that you accomplish, these are the incentives that you get, and these are the ways that you can say to your people, like, we succeeded, we survived, we fought the red bear and we won, and we're stronger people for it. The 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 deal is there for the taking. The actors have to act. They have to take it.
what yeah, well said.
Yeah,
So
I hope they do. I mean, I hope something comes out of this summit and we get a ceasefire either now or soon in the future, because I think it ultimately it will save a lot of lives. And the longer this war goes on, it's like World War I. Like the photos of those battlegrounds are just barbed wire and ditches, and it's being fought with modern weapons, so it's not World War I, but the battlefield is like World War I. It's just
Yeah.
there's it's not the 21st modern battlefield that I think a lot of military planners envision, which is like breakouts and using jets and drones and conquering hundreds of square miles a day. That's not the conflict zone in Ukraine, and it's never going to be. It's a meat
Well,
grinder and a slog.
and I think in some ways, I hate to say this because this sounds horrific. What I'm about to say, and there's no good way. There's no good way to say this, but I actually think it's better that they have traditional warfare rather than like drone warfare or something like that. Because I mean, my God, drone warfare, war is chaotic enough as is.
Mm-hmm.
Like unmanned drone warfare would be even more, I guess, fucked up, for lack of a better term. I will say the one thing that is kind of jarring is this is the first war. I mean, in a weird way, it's kind of like darkly funny, but this is the first war that's been like live streamed on like social media and like
Yeah.
and like there are literally like Instagram influencers that are
Yep.
taking photos like from the battlefield, and
Yep.
it's like
Yeah. Yeah. It's
and it's like I never thought I would be seeing selfies like
mhm.
from the battlefield, and like
Yeah.
I mean, if it weren't so tragic, it would be comical almost.
Yeah. It's funny, like, because I feel like every generation has kind of had that since Vietnam, because Vietnam, the media stories coming from Vietnam defined kind of baby boomers.
Yeah,
The first Gulf War kind of defined Gen X or Gen Y, and then to baby boomers to a degree.
yeah,
The Iraq War and Afghanistan defined millennials, and
yeah.
now this war is kind of defining Gen Z and honestly some millennials too. I mean, we're young enough that we still pay attention to social media and see the
Yeah,
images.
the only difference I would say is, I mean, it certainly affects Gen Z in other countries, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it affects Gen Z here. It affects Gen Z here
Mm-hmm.
to the extent that they see it, in the news maybe, but it's not like the Iraq War was for us being millennials, where like even younger millennials like myself, uh, you know, like I have cousins you know, are who are Iraq War veterans, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or like, even like after I graduated from high school, like you know, like uh, my friends, some of them enlisted in the service, and granted, the warfare wasn't deadly like it was in the early days when we were kids, but still, like I have friends who have been over to Iraq and Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
Gen Z doesn't really have that, at least not in the U.S. for
Yeah,
the Iraq, for the Russia and Ukraine thing, and
yeah.
hopefully we don't.
Yeah, yeah.
So
No, I agree with you. I think in the context of, knowing somebody who's been into a foreign war zone, you're right. We don't, a Gen Z doesn't have in Afghanistan, in Iraq in the same way that we do or that even Gen Y does, because there were quite a few service members of Gen Y who served in Afghanistan and Iraq. So, like you, I hope they don't have to live through that experience, because nobody wins in that situation. War is unpredictable, and you can have the best technology in the world, but let's be honest, there's no technology that can weed out a guerrilla war, and that's always going to be true.
Right.
As long as there's insurgents and they can pick up a rifle and find some place to hide, then there's nothing you can do about it, unless you are willing to basically indiscriminately kill a bunch of innocent people to kill that threat. And that then you get into issues of morality and values. And so you can't take that out of war. That's the brutality of war. And technology cannot erase the brutality of war.
Right.
So
Yeah, no, that's sad, but true.
it's true.
That is something. It's very interesting that you say that, because as an author who writes in the thriller space, like a lot of what I write is fiction, but it is based off of fact to a certain extent. And I have interviewed a lot of authors who and just like people in general who have military backgrounds, or they've been in the service.
Mhm.
And that's been the one thing that they've all said regarding the regarding this Russia Ukraine thing, is no matter what generation it is, whether it be World War II, whether it be Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, or the current conflict,
Mhm.
the technology might change and the weaponry might change, but at the end of the day, there's always going to be, man versus man, and there's always going to be the sheer brutality of war.
Yeah.
And at the point where unmanned warfare with drones could affect certain things, but people are very hesitant to use them because of, cautions around AI, and also because, there's no way for, computers be clinical the way humans are.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I mean, drones are mostly still controlled by people, and drones still kill people. So, you can't the usage of drones still doesn't take out that brutality in war. And so, that was kind of one of those weird things about like American air power, and how it can win a conflict, and you don't like soldiers don't have to be in danger when they go in because American air power is so superior. That, yeah, you can soften up a target, but you're not gonna get everybody, and you're still in a conflict zone. You're gonna have to go house to house. You're gonna have people who can make those life and death split second decisions. That's never gonna change.
right.
But especially when you have rules of engagement that say, like, you can't just shoot civilians indiscriminately. Like, we value life, and you can't kill 20 children to get a terrorist. Like, that's not okay. And that was one of the big reasons why Israel, and to this day, even with the West Bank, uh, why is or Gaza Strip, excuse me, why Israel is getting so much flack for how it's handling the Gaza Strip, because they very much are not abiding by those rules of engagement. And there's
Yeah.
there's an ungodly amount of collateral damage in the Gaza Strip. And probably Josh and I would mostly agree on the Gaza Strip that what Israel is doing, and I don't want to go get us down this rabbit hole, but what Israel is doing
Yeah.
what Israel is doing in the Gaza Strip is downright anti-human. I won't call it a genocide, but I will definitely say that it is anti-human rights. And
Yeah.
it's governed by the internal politics of Israel, but the consequences of it are just devastating to the Palestinians, and it is a human rights travesty. Now
Yeah,
that's just my opinion. Others may
no, I
disagree, but
I agree too, and I do wish that hopefully we can get like a podcast with you know, the three of us, you and Josh, talk at this because I certainly feel like I certainly feel like there's been maybe a little bit of tension in the group chat. I basically there's no way to like fully to like I guess explain everyone's position well over text on the
yeah,
on the whole thing, but like my whole thing is yeah, generally like I do feel that Israel is justified largely at least to go in with with their initial intention into the Gaza Strip of trying
it's just
to
yeah,
take out Hamas and whatnot. I don't think anyone would deny that. However, even I and a lot of Jews I even know
mm-hmm,
have really started even ones who were
mm-hmm,
pro Netanyahu, and I would consider myself, even though I'm a Christian, I was very pro Netanyahu for years.
mm-hmm.
But even I have kind of like, well, this guy was in special forces for so long. Maybe he is just a little more bloodthirsty. I, I mean,
Yeah,
it's interesting. Because on the one hand, like I actually have read up a fair amount on Netanyahu, and my take on Netanyahu is nuanced because I can at least sympathize with him being extremely angry because his brother was murdered by basically like Hamas back in the early 70s.
mm-hmm,
And I believe like other members of his family have been as well. I totally sympathize with him being angry. However, I think that I think looking in hindsight, that he might have been an excellent warrior, but
mm-hmm.
I'm not so sure that that would make him the best, leader necessarily for Israel, just because
Yeah.
he's always in that fighting mode, for better or for worse.
Yeah, I mean Israel has been very much defined by Netanyahu, but
Yeah,
there's not a huge difference in Israeli politics and how to deal with with Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza Strip among the political parties. The political parties are almost divided along
yeah.
Netanyahu specifically, which tells you how much he's defined their politics over the last
The
20 years. But the left wing alternative to Likud and Netanyahu being hawkish on foreign policy doesn't mean that they would be very different in how they would deal with the
yeah,
Gaza Strip. Like they might just be like, you know what, we're pulling our troops out, we're putting a border, we're putting troops on the border, but you know what, aid trucks can go in. We're not gonna bomb food aid stations for civilians. We'll keep an eye on you, but we're not getting directly involved in there in the same way
right.
that Netanyahu continues to have Israel in. So, those are the nuances of the differences between the political parties.
Yeah,
But like you, I was supportive of Israel responding to an obvious terrorist attack that occurred from the Gaza Strip, and I was even supportive of them when they were kind of doing the indiscriminate attacks and bombing buildings and trying to return the hostages, but it's just gone too far. It's just endless. Like there is no purpose now other than to inflict carnage on the Palestinian civilians. And my parents are hardcore Republican conservatives. They're obviously boomers, and they always argue this, like, well, Israel was justified to attack, and terrorists are hiding among the civilians, and where are all the good moderate Muslims, Palestinians among the group? And it's like, well, they're either all dead because they've been bombed into oblivion, or B, they're so busy trying to help others survive that they don't have, and they have so much of their own personal animosity towards Israel that they're not going to speak up and be like, okay, we should get along with Israel, because at some point you're just so disgusted with your alternative that you may not hate them, but you can't bring yourself to even have discussions with them, and that
The
that is what is happening.
Yeah, the interesting thing, I'll have to send you a link to this, but I have a I have a good friend who co-hosts another podcast. His name is Craig Mansfeld, and his podcast is interesting because he's an engineer,
Hmm.
and one of his co-hosts isn't it? And one of his co-hosts is an engineer. So they talk like a lot about like a lot of science and nerdy stuff too
Hmm.
in regards
Hmm.
to engineering, but they do cover politics,
Yeah.
and they're both conservatives. And Craig is, I would say that he's an American Jew, but he's very like pro, I guess, MAGA Jew. Like
Hmm.
he very much identifies himself as like, yeah, I am Jewish, but I'm not like super orthodox, but I'm
Hmm.
also like he's pro Israel to the to the extent like, yeah, it is kind of like the Jewish homeland, but he has said, and I'll have to send you a few episodes, but he has said that the one thing that's weird to him and a lot of other, I guess, conservative Jews out there that aren't Ben Shapiro or Dennis Prager is there's the whole thing of, well, we must support Israel at like all costs, no
Yeah.
matter what they do. And Craig's just like, well, like like I'm pro Jew, and like, yeah, we should go after the motherfuckers that
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
like attacked Americans on October
Yeah. Yeah.
7th, but I don't want innocent kids, who are in Gaza getting bombed either,
Yeah.
because then that just inflames the anti-Semitism, and
Yeah. And it
you know,
just it makes it hard for there to be any permanent long-term solution to the crisis. I mean, because
yeah,
it is a crisis. And that's, I mean, I agree with him. I think that's the crux of the issue, is that this has gone much further than a defensive war. In fact, it's not even a war anymore. It's, like I said, it border I would call it a genocide if Israel was actually try deliberately, like, killing thousands and thousands and thousands of people. But they very much are trying to make conditions in Gaza as
yeah.
inhumane and unsustainable as possible, and that's a choice by Israel. And go ahead.
And their justification for that would be, well, Hamas hides in plain sight, and it's like it's like hunting for a needle in a haystack.
I
And
know. Yeah.
to a certain extent, Josh, I can sympathize with that, but it's like, okay, does that justify the cost of killing 10 civilians just to kill
Yeah.
one?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know what the exact ratios are, and it doesn't really even matter, but it's like, is it worth the civilian cost?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
to pun.
I mean, I think most, even on the left, the opposition to Netanyahu and his government, I think most of them would actually say yes. But I think how they would carry it out is drastically different than Netanyahu. A, because politically they want to be seen as different from Netanyahu, but B, because they probably actually have some moral issues with how the war is being run. I mean, and like I said, I probably shouldn't call it a war. It's an occupation, is what it is at this point. So, and expecting the people in Gaza to like rise up or to be like, okay, we want some sort of peace deal, when literally Gaza is, it's the smallest landmass with the highest density of people in the world. And it's a bombed out husk, and it is also one of the youngest areas in the entire country, which means all the men and women have been killed or left. So all you have are children. And
Yeah.
so then that makes it even worse, because that means disproportionately they're the ones who suffer and they're the ones who die in incidental or in misfires or collateral damage.
Yeah, well, and
It's
then, and then there's the argument too that that's how you get, radicals is,
exactly, yeah,
a child a child sees their entire family bombed,
yep,
and killed in a
yep,
war, and then, the Islamic clerics who radicalize
yep,
young kids, they come and say, and they say stuff like, oh, well, the Jews, in the West, they did that. They did this. They're the great Satan.
yep,
And, to be fair, like, I'm not saying it's good, but, that kid is, looking at the evidence before them and,
mm-hmm,
they're
yep,
like, well, they're right.
yep.
So,
Well, and
and the cycle continues.
yeah, well,
So,
and the government of that territory doesn't have the ability to provide the basic services that that child would need, and that child's parents may be dead. So then it's not just the cleric radicalizing the kid or kids, it is literally the cleric and the terrorist organization is taking care of the kids. So
right.
the kids are reliant on this organization, and it creates this relationship, like the kids or the teenagers, the young adults, they trust them, and there's no way to break that trust, because it's not just a trust you because you say the things that I believe. It's also I trust you because you're taking care of me and these other people aren't.
Right.
And so that's another consequence, is when you bomb a government out of existence or its ability to provide basic services, but a terrorist organization has the basic infrastructure to do what the government cannot, you make people dependent on these organizations inadvertently. So, that's another case where I think Israel is spiting itself by what it's doing in the Gaza Strip. Like they're just creating a breeding ground for further radicalism and further attacks.
Yeah, and I would say, and again, this is, something I've heard from, Craig and other, American Jews who again are all very pro-Israel for the
Mm-hmm.
most part, and I think this point is valid. You know, I guess one of the biggest criticisms I've heard of, Netanyahu and his administration that makes, that like I buy as legitimate is when it comes to those factors that you just mentioned of, kids being orphaned and, the Taliban, being left to take care of them, or, any of these other groups. Putin either, I mean, not Putin, Netanyahu either doesn't factor that in at all or he doesn't care. Either one is not good.
Yeah. Yeah, whether it's he doesn't care or he doesn't, yeah, or he doesn't factor it in. I mean, neither option, neither one is really good either way. So it just furthers an endless conflict. And I love my parents and I don't want to rag on them, but they also say things like, oh, these people have been at war for thousands of years, they're always going to be at war. And it's like, they're always going to be at war because of the decisions that they make, not because they've been at war for thousands of years. If somebody tried something different than the things that they had done in the past 1,000 years, maybe there wouldn't be war. Maybe if Israel actually was like, okay, we're going to give you some food and we're not going to bomb you into oblivion, maybe things would be different. Or maybe if Israel sent in special forces and did the tough house to house
Yeah.
anti-insurgency versus the we're just going to bomb everything out of existence. Like, if Israel did that and tried to limit collateral damage, maybe Palestinians would have a different image of Israel. Maybe the reformers would be like, yeah, okay, let's speak up about this.
Well, yeah, well, the IDF was doing that in the beginning, like after October 7th, right? And I mean, from what I remember, they were doing that door to door thing. And I mean, obviously there were instances where, they were stumbling into, booby traps and whatnot. And I don't want to be callous in saying this because that is tragic. But if you are part of Israeli special forces or any special forces, even the SEALs or the Delta or Force, you go into that job full well knowing that there's a risk that you might not come home. And so losing your best, losing your elite, it is a tragedy.
Yeah.
But for the IDF to go from that to then
carpet bombing,
Netanyahu just saying, okay, well, we're just going to collaterally bomb, everyone. It's like, at least the professionals know the risk that they're taking, and they know the potential sacrifice.
Yeah. Well, and it's like I said, it's a political decision on Netanyahu's part, which is it's easier to bomb people and not have your soldiers or your pilots die and then have to answer to those families. It's easier to bomb your enemy than it is to actually do the hard stuff where your soldiers might die and you have to tell the families your son or your daughter was killed. And that's
right.
That's a political calculation that Netanyahu is making. I'm not saying others wouldn't do this, the opposition parties wouldn't do the same, but I think, like I said, the opposition parties would behave differently in the sense of they might stop the bombings and they might move the Israeli soldiers out of the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, I mean, it would also be interesting too because there has been talk about Netanyahu potentially maybe stepping down or being forced to resign or something over this, and it would be interesting to know what this whole thing would look like under different Israeli leadership. I'm not enough of an expert in the inner workings of Israeli politics to know what that would look like, but I from what I understand, there has kind of been a kind of like a desire even from some Israelis to say, well, maybe someone else should step in here.
Yeah. I mean, Israeli politics is, they had like 5 elections in the last 3 or 4 years, and it was because it's a parliamentary coalition system. So if you're the largest party, but you're a coalition, if you're the largest party, but you don't have a majority, then you can't really functionally govern because the opposition is larger. So I think there's been a hesitation on the right to challenge Netanyahu during the war, but I think that's going to change. But Netanyahu has said he's going to run again. I mean,
well, they're also conspiracy theories out there that that he may have that he knew about this attack beforehand and let it happen because supposedly like he's under investigation for things and
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah,
want to be and I don't want to and I don't want to linger on like conspiracy theories like that because I don't know how true they are.
yeah,
But if that is a factor, one does. Let me put it this way. Like I was initially like extremely dismissive of his corruption allegations as a whole,
hmm
but the way he's kind of dragged things on, it's kind of like, well, I wasn't skeptical before, but maybe there is something there.
yeah. I think it's kind of like those theories about Pearl Harbor and whether FDR let Pearl Harbor happen or ignored warnings. I think it's more likely than not that Netanyahu just took his eye off the ball and he ignored warnings, and then because of that, mid-level bureaucrats ignored warnings, and that led to the consequences. I don't necessarily think Netanyahu let it happen purposely, maybe willful ignorance, but yeah, that's probably something we'll never know, but I'm pretty sure that he'll be attacked for it in the next election. I don't think the opposition is going to let it go.
For sure, for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
So
So,
yeah, I mean, I think you know uh, the other thing I'm kind of curious on too is like I almost like it's a shame that Jared Kushner isn't in the administration. I know that some people have been like critical of Trump for nepotism regarding the whole thing, but I will say that like it did seem that when Kushner was in the first administration, there was noticeable efforts, to resolving kind of the tensions in the Middle East.
mhm.
And I don't know if you ever listened to Lex Friedman, but Jared Kushner was on Lex Friedman's podcast, and Kushner seemed to have a very like nuanced take on how to deal with the Israel Palestine conflict
Mhm.
that was better than I guess most other takes I've heard now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's like we talked about with Russia and Ukraine. You have to have people in the room to have those discussions. So it's a tough situation to solve. And just like Russia and Ukraine, Israel, the Gaza Strip, even extended out to Iran, everybody's going to have to give up something to actually have a lasting peace. And that's the hard part. They all have different interests that they're representing, and they all have different objectives that they want accomplished.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing with Iran is, I mean, war with Iran is really scary because, like, at least with like Russia, they seem to at least value, human life. But Iran, you know, there are enough radical elements where like they really are kind of like apocalyptic. So
I mean, they can be, but the thing is, like, I don't know if you read the reports or not, but that Trump told Israel, don't assassinate the Ayatollah, or like Israel presented to the US, we're going to assassinate the Ayatollah, and we said no. And the reason why we said no is because the dude's a rational actor. He does moderate some of the worst elements of his military. So even though Iran blusters, and certain Iranians give this incendiary rhetoric, they're also rational actors. They also behave rationally. Their rhetoric is, I mean, outside of the God doesn't want Israel to exist, their rhetoric is very, very similar to North Korea's, where
yeah,
Kim Jong Il, used to is said like, "I want to wipe South Korea off the map. If I get a nuke, I'm going to use it," kind of thing. And they have nukes. Why don't they use them? because they're rational actors and they get subsidies from the West and they get subsidies from China. And so they use those nukes as leverage to get economic support from other countries. That's a rational thing to do. It's not a rational thing to, detonate a nuke in another country, but they don't do it. And the same can be said for Iran. Like, what is Iran waiting 20 years for to develop a nuke? Like, what do you get out of developing a nuke for 20 years? That's right. You get Western attention and you get international recognition or acknowledgement. You get a potential deal of economic subsidies from the West and recognition from other Middle Eastern countries. So they're rational actors as well. They just mix it in with inflammatory rhetoric.
Yeah, for sure.
So their actions against Israel were purely rational when Israel launched their attack. So they're behaving like a rational actor would, which is they responded, but they never responded in such a way that the war had a chance to escalate.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So it's easy to get into the hyperbole and they're an existential threat to the universe or the world, but in actuality almost everybody making these decisions are rational actors, and they're just responding to the incentives and that are created.
Yeah, well, to be fair, I've never thought that like Iran was an existential crisis to the world as a whole.
Yeah.
But I do think that Iran is an existential threat to the US, mostly because they've said that they want to wipe the Great Satan off from the map. And I know that, Josh is kind of, I know he's not here, so I'll try not to criticize him, too much. I know he'll disagree and be like, and he'll be like, well, that's not entirely true. There's deeper meaning, and there might be, but for the time being, like when the I says, I want to wipe the Great Satan off the earth, I kind of want to take him his, at face value. And, and so, yeah, when we have people like that who want to take us out, yeah, I'm not so sure, I'm not saying that, like, I want to take them out unprovoked, but hey, if a SEAL team were to go, knock on his door, I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to that either. So,
I mean, I would say I think you have to look beyond the rhetoric, because he's still, even that rhetoric is rational in the sense that he's placating the extremists in his party or his government, and by saying that, it allows him, a relative moderate, to stay in power and in those people's good graces. So I'm not saying you ignore it. I'm just saying you have to take it in the context in which it's delivered.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, sir, I mean, I know it's been 2 hours and 15 minutes. I know it's late. But we could talk for another.
We could. I know. Yeah.
We could do like a whole, like one of those marathon like gamer streams.
24-hour stream.
Yeah, 24-hour stream, but it's just us talking foreign policy.
Yeah. Let me get my water and my popcorn, or some sustenance.
Yeah, but anyway, yeah. So I mean, I guess what we covered a lot of ground regarding the summit.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess to kind of summarize it, I mean, at least from my perspective, it would be nice if things could be wrapped up, nicely at this meeting. However, I don't think it's going to, happen. And I mean, it seems to me that you kind of have that same opinion, but
yeah.
where, so I guess kind of with the summit, where do you think you would like things to kind of end up realistically? Or where do you think a good, I guess, ending point / starting point would be for this?
I mean, for the summit, I mean, I think it probably went as well as it could go. I think that the end point, short term, would be a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, and then long term, some sort of sustainable peace deal or framework between those countries. But like I said, I think it's going to involve trade offs and from everybody. Ukraine is going to want some sort of security guarantee Russia has to give it. And then in turn, I think Ukraine is going to have to give up not all of their territory that they've lost, but they're going to have to give up the vast majority of it.
Yeah, that's fair.
So, which I think the security guarantee for Ukraine is much bigger than the territory they give up to Russia, because that security guarantee is basically, from what I understand, it's basically the equivalent of Article 5 for NATO. And that literally means if Russia attacked Ukraine again, we could get involved, European countries could get involved. It could literally be World War III because everybody else would get involved. So
Yeah.
that's a huge deal. Like, that's one of the reasons why Europe has not gotten directly involved with Ukraine is Ukraine's not a member of NATO. So there is no Article 5 guarantee for defense like there would be if, Russia attacked Estonia or Latvia.
One of the other things I saw too, it is interesting that you brought up Israel and Palestine tonight, because to kind of connect the two in a weird situation, in a weird way, one of the things I did see from Tulsi Gabbard probably about like a month or two ago, it was really quick, but basically someone asked, her basically about the, Israel-Palestine conflict, and I don't know if it was her that answered directly, but it might have been someone from her office. But basically what they said was, we have to deal with, Russia and Ukraine first. That's kind of on our docket, and then we'll see about, maybe sitting down with, Israel and a representative, from Palestine. So
Yeah.
I think it's a thing of, the administration is trying to do the best they can to kind of, intercede where they can. It's kind of like a, which pot, on the stove takes the most precedence of kind of like trying to keep from boiling over.
Yeah.
So
Well, and it makes sense. Ukraine and Russia and Europe is much more economically impactful to the U.S. And also, Russia and Ukraine are at war right now. Iran and Israel and even Palestine, they're not really at war right now. So it's more of an impact to get a ceasefire for Russia and Ukraine than it is to try and negotiate some sort of Middle Eastern peace deal or some sort of framework. So it makes sense.
yeah, it does. Yeah, it's the world is, I am optimistic that the summit will go well, but I'm also trying to keep my expectations low, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, you're dealing with people, and so you don't know how they're going to react. So I'm like you, I'm optimistic, but I'm not my hopes are not going to be completely demolished, or my hopes wouldn't be completely demolished if nothing comes of it. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, yeah, like I said, I think I'm gonna, you know, I think with the way I'm looking at things and I think the way you're looking at things, I don't think I'm going to be hugely disappointed with the results. Whereas I think a lot of people are kind of who are kind of betting the farm on this thing being the end all be all, are going to be disappointed.
Yeah,
But
but
yeah,
that's people.
yeah, and that's global politics, man.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, sir, I want to thank you for coming on, and hey, I love doing this. So, where can people find you, and
So I still need to restart my, having a brain fart. I still need to restart my Substack, but people can find me on Twitter at Gabriel Iacoboni. That's my Twitter handle, and then I'm occasionally active on the other social medias as well.
Oh yeah, you mean like dumpster book, as I call
Yeah,
it
the
now.
book, the book,
The
F book.
yeah, the flaming trash fire.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it hasn't gotten better. Let's put it that way.
No, but it's like people like always ask me to comment on political stuff over there, and I'm like, look, you don't want me to, because even if I make the most cohesive, well thought out argument, there's always going to be the one guy that's like, fuck you, your opinion sucks. Here's
Yeah.
why, and
There always
it's
has to
going
be
to be an endless
somebody who's going
fight.
to respond.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, Substack's great. I'll definitely follow you on there. And, I promise you, folks, we will get back into doing the regular Blokes podcast at
Yes,
some point.
we
So
do need to, yeah, we do need to do that.
I do have an interesting topic, maybe upcoming, but I'll have to talk to you about that after the show. So, but anyway, well, folks, I appreciate you tuning in for this late Monday edition, and you're probably listening to this on Tuesday, but anyway, we appreciate you being here. I'll be back live Wednesday, and Gabe, actually, if you want to come on Wednesday night, maybe this thing will be concluded, the summit.
Yeah.
I don't know when it's supposed to end, but if it is, maybe doing a post-op or
Sure.
something once we have more information.
Yeah. If there's something new, I'd be happy to.
Alrighty. Well, I appreciate you for coming on, and I appreciate the audience as well. So take care, everyone, and we'll talk to you on the next episode.
See ya.
The right to offend is not some pesky little part of freedom of speech that we have to put up with. It is the heart and soul and lungs of freedom of speech. It is the coursing lifeblood of human progress. It is the instigator of liberty and modernity and science and understanding. What a laughing stock today's student leaders are, that they can so casually dismiss the right to be offensive without realizing that their lovely, enlightened lives are the gift of individuals who gave offense. Offensiveness is not just something we have to begrudgingly accept. Offensiveness is the motor of human progress.
Thank you for watching the Whitfield Report live on the Right to Offend Media Network. Make sure to check out Sam's books on Amazon, Audible, and Kindle. You can follow Sam on X at SamW_NGC and the Right to Offend Media Network at RTO Media. Like, comment, subscribe, and share with your friends. And until next time, God bless, God save this great nation. God, freedom, legacy, in that order.